This married couple of mind experts has been researching suffering and how to resolve it for 30 years.
Anxiety is the symptom, not the cause. It's like when your tooth hurts and you only treat the pain. It's like pruning a plant. If you leave the root inside, it will come back even stronger.
Maria and Jesus have been saying what no one else dares to say for decades.
Life feels like endless suffering, but there must be another way.
That mindfulness doesn't cure, that positive thinking makes you sick, that neuroscience alone doesn't solve things, and that most therapy today is treating symptoms, not causes.
In suffering, there is always at least one mistaken idea.
Healing isn't about reading books or joining wellness trends. Healing is a complex exercise that few are willing to face.
That happened to me in my childhood. Your parents are to blame, you're beyond help. That can't be.
Emotion is much stronger than thought.
It's just that emotion is the effect of a problem.
It's like playing roulette.
Welcome to Mejor que Ayer, María Ibáñez and Jesús Jiménez. Welcome to Mejor que Ayer, María and Jesús. How are you?
Very well. Delighted to be here.
A beautiful episode of A3. I love those dynamic episodes, right? On A3, you are married, right?
Married?
Yes, you said you do everything together, books and outreach, that's right.
We work together. We write together. We do everything together.
Are you both trained psychologists?
He's a psychologist. I'm a psychotherapist.
Great. Okay, well, we have a fascinating talk, a very provocative conversation. I want to start off strong. There have never been as many psychologists and psychotherapists on social media, and the number keeps growing daily. Nor has there ever been so much mindfulness, so many self-help books, or so many tools, apparently. But it hurts me that the reality is people's mental health is getting worse and worse. More anxiety, more depression, even higher rates of, suicide and horrible things, right? So what's happening? Why isn't mental health getting better?
Actually, we believe there are two factors related to what I'm talking about. One is that psychology is talked about much more. So people are much more aware that others are suffering, that there are problems, much more than before, right? When we started, it seemed like a marginal thing, right? And now, it's everywhere, and the outreach is very broad. And on the other hand, there's a tendency toward isolation. We believe that one of the factors is that there's a tendency toward isolation, individualism, and social breakdown. There are several factors, such as social pressure and the economy, that are causing people to experience greater stress and perhaps weaker social bonds. And we believe that this is having a big influence on the increase in psychological problems.
Above all, economic insecurity and job uncertainty. Before, a family could get by on one salary. Now every family member has to find a way to get by. That causes a lot of insecurity and competitiveness with oneself and others.
Of course. Do you think there are more sources of stress now than in the time of our grandparents or my grandparents, for example?
For example, I think so. Economic and job insecurity are major reasons.
There are psychological challenges that were already there. There are psychological challenges, life is complex, and there are many situations that can make you suffer. But now the pressure is greater. It's true that talking about psychology makes people look for ways to resolve that suffering, but maybe the pressure is greater now, yes.
Very interesting. Later we'll talk about isolation and we'll try to unpack the causes of the psychological isolation we experience, right? And you also say in your book something that's quite disruptive and strong, which is that most of what is offered today as therapy or psychology is really just palliative, but it doesn't address the causes. Can you explain this to us?
Yes, because what happens is that people seek help to relieve anxiety, and so the symptom is treated. Anxiety is the symptom, it's not the cause, or depression or distress or so many other problems that exist. It's like having a toothache and only treating the pain, which is just a symptom. You need to address the cause. But normally the focus is just getting rid of anxiety. It's like pruning a plant. If you leave the root, it'll return even stronger. So there are a lot of people who treat anxiety or depression and experience some improvement, but over time it comes back. And then people usually say, it just can't be solved. It's a problem, a chronic problem.
That's where the label comes in, right? Generalized anxiety disorder and so on. And now this is mine, right? Yes.
And so that doesn't have a solution anymore. It's just going to be recurrent. No, it's because the cause hasn't been addressed and it hasn't been resolved.
Okay, so you always think that a mental health problem has a cause that can be sought out?
Exactly, and a psychological cause. Because now, with the rise of neuroscience, it's true that there are some very interesting things. but people are extrapolating how the brain works to psychological problems. We may discuss that later, but there's a fundamental mistake. For a long time, it was said that serotonin or a lack of serotonin was the cause of depression. Of course. Now science is realizing that this isn't the case. Of course. So there are many different approaches trying to find a solution to suffering. And we see how they keep swinging from one side to the other without really getting to the cause, to understand what the real cause of the problem is.
Of course. I mean, you advocate more for a psychological cause than a neurological one. Or let's say, yes, the serotonin issue is a very good example, right? We used to think there were people who produced or recycled less serotonin, and that by treating that with a drug, their depression would improve. But it turns out that's not the case.
It's been shown that's not true. Studies, I'm sure you've read them, show people can have a serotonin deficit without being depressed, and there's no real correlation between the two. Now, it's the same with the happiness hormones, oxytocin. It's like, if you want to improve your stress, you have to lower your cortisol. That's not how it is. If anything, cortisol, which serves many purposes, might go up because of the psychological problem, not the other way around. Okay, so the cause of a psychological problem is always psychological. There can be a neurological problem that affects a human being, of course. There could be a deficiency that affects you or a general discomfort in the body.
And then there can be biological factors like diseases, including hormonal ones. For example, hyperthyroidism, which can cause anxiety or psychological discomfort.
Thank you. It depends on the psychological aspect, not the physiological. It's about how a person reacts. They may or may not experience it. Thank you.
Well, the physical symptoms are undeniable. Rapid heartbeat, sweating, discomfort, right? Of course, I understand that these are two factors that are correlated with each other, right? But in the end, you try to get to the causes of the pain. How do you go deeper with the patient on this?
For example, there are many people who come in with vertigo and are told it's stress. Well, stress is a word that defines a lot of conflicts because stress seems like a catch-all term people lump many psychological problems into without unpacking them. So, they break them down. So, there are people who come in with physical symptoms and are treated as if it were a physical problem. But when we explore their unconscious, we find it's psychological. And when you delve into the psychological problem, which is unconscious, the dizziness goes away, the somatic symptoms disappear, and the person gets better. But without going to that unconscious part, it's practically impossible because it's like trying to put a cream on the skin of your stomach when your stomach has an ulcer. It only helps up to a point. So, to treat a symptom, whether it's psychological or already somatized, you have to go to the unconscious, which is where the causes of psychological problems are.
And what techniques do you use to do that? I mean, how do you work with the person?
The first thing is, well, that person tells their story and explains what's happening to them, but what they're telling is the conscious part, what they believe it is. There are people who say, what happens to me is because of something that happened in my childhood. Well, okay, that's true. If it happened in your childhood and your parents are to blame, then you have no solution left. That can't be right. Your parents may have done things wrong, but the way you interpreted it and experienced it is different. On one occasion, we had someone come in with many traumas stemming from her childhood relationship with her parents. She had a twin brother, and we invited him too. Completely different. The same genetics, the same upbringing, everything the same. The other one was fine, but this one has issues. Then, besides the external factor, there are also internal factors.
That's where he works.
That's where we're going. We work both with the external part because they need to understand it, but then, above all, we help that person to go into their unconscious. And that's when they see what's there. The reality? No, it's not theoretical, it's about reality.
Okay, right. And I understand that all of this is simply done using words, without using any substances, any medication, or anything like that.
Exactly. It's using words, talking with that person. We already have a lot of experience. We've done a lot of research. So many times people give you information without meaning to, right? Well, yesterday, for example, we were talking with someone who had trouble finding a partner and was afraid to start another relationship. So I said, tell me about your partners. So in each relationship, she would say something and always add a little comment. He was a good person, treated me well, was sweet. But that was something that kept repeating. So if you notice that, for this person, this is important. Let's see what happened. So, if you already know the story, or if he doesn't tell you, you start to see the connection between his relationship with his parents, how he interpreted that, if he had any problems with a sibling. And you start to see what emotions move him in romantic relationships, what conditioning he has. So, part of it is reflecting and helping that person to see it. Have you noticed this? Have you noticed that you usually say this phrase? What would happen if your partner? No, that would be horrible for me, I mean. So maybe you're running away from that. Then the person starts to realize things they had overlooked or simply hadn't focused on before. But then another thing that is very decisive in what we do is how we deal with the emotional part. The emotional side is usually approached rationally. Even emotional intelligence proposes rational solutions, and of course that doesn't work. Because what you're doing is using thought to control emotion. That's why we don't like it at all. When people say, I'm working on my emotions by brute force, how are you doing it? Of course, working on emotions means trying to control them with your head. And that doesn't solve them.
Working on them doesn't solve it because emotion is much stronger than thought.
It's just that emotion is the effect of a problem. So again, that's just the effect. So if you try to control the effect, you're repressing the cause and therefore you don't have a solution. So what we mainly work on is getting people to be curious about understanding rather than just getting rid of anxiety. Because if they try to get rid of anxiety, what they're going to do is repress it. Or depression, people suffer.
Or medicate it.
So what they do is that on the surface, it seems like they don't notice it, but it has gone into the unconscious. We forget that we have an unconscious. People believe they have what they know, but their knowledge is limited. So what we do is help people discover their inner world and connect with it. And how do we do that? The person closes their eyes. Instead of using ageless signs, they simply pay attention. Not to imagine or to relax or to meditate. No. It's just to close their eyes and pay attention to what happens inside them. They begin to notice things like a huge hand, a tiny foot, or an eye falling out. That's not physical. The body isn't like that. But you say, how can it be that I have an eye that's falling out? Physically, no. Or I notice a foot that's floating. But you have them on the ground. So that's not physical anymore. That's already the internal part. And each of those things are unresolved conflicts. When the person understands what the conflict is and realizes it, because there are people who say, what happens to me is that I don't like relationships with people who are very arrogant. Okay, great. But let's see what the cause is. And what is the cause? Well, maybe it's, no, I just don't like it. That's the conscious part. But what's the unconscious cause? Well, maybe it's that she feels inferior, that she's very competitive, and when the other person competes with her, she doesn't feel capable. So all of that needs to be looked at inside. The conscious part is not enough.
I'm not sure I understood, but how do you connect feeling like one foot is heavier than the other to a conflict? Yes.
We should do that with you sometime so you can try it.
What is that based on? Every conflict?
Every conflict is going to create a distortion inside. The mind occupies the whole body. The mind is not the brain. The brain is how the mind communicates with the conscious part. But the mind is much more than the brain and the body. So when there is a conflict in the mind, that is going to create a distortion. For example, vertigo, the vertigo we talked about earlier. Many people have vertigo. And when you start to observe what's happening inside, you begin to realize that there's a part inside that's spinning at full speed. Sometimes you say, I notice it here or there. I respond, you're not doing that. No, I'm not. Let's find the cause. When we see what the cause is, the vertigo disappears. That's a matter of minutes.
And I had learned this through years of trial and error, because I imagine, had I learned this from someone? No.
Researching with ourselves, of course. Of course. I mean, with ourselves and observing the world and how people work. Us, yes.
Yes. We studied the field, we studied the different schools of psychology, psychiatry, and we were looking into alternative approaches, philosophy, meditation, bioenergetics. We have been researching each thing, so we saw that there was a point that fell short. I mean, there was something there, a gap that remained unresolved. So researching together, that's when we realized that in suffering, there is always at least one mistaken idea. There is a mistaken idea, which is not the same as a thought. For example, now in cognitive behavioral theory, a lot of emphasis is placed on thought. But thought is the discursive thought that one hears in their head. But behind that thought, there are conclusions that you have reached throughout your life. Those conclusions, which may be unconscious, are shaping what you think. If you think that life is horrible, then you'll go out on the street and at the first problem you'll think, this is horrible. Or what a disgusting life. Or this is uncomfortable. Or this is a... So those reactions in your thoughts come from conclusions that you have. And those conclusions aren't addressed. If those conclusions remain, you struggle with yourself, battling your thoughts and feelings, trying to control what you feel with your thoughts.
And this trend in self-help books that talk, for example, about affirmations, about saying, I am this, I am that, I do this, that has an impact. I mean, it reaches, it enters, it penetrates into the deepest parts of the unconscious.
Not at all. On the contrary, the unconscious gets upset. The unconscious isn't just information sitting there still. The unconscious, the person starts to connect with their unconscious. The unconscious is opposed to the conscious, and usually the conscious. Also, most people insult themselves. They say, I'm an idiot. They demand things from themselves. That's a battle against oneself. So there's an internal struggle. So when the person starts to connect, with their inner part and starts to connect with it, that is, there it goes. When you told me this, the hand changed. It's not big now, it's small. Or when I say that, now it moves around a certain place, it changes. She is going to experience it. We are not the ones telling her. So when she realizes there's an unconscious with its own will, and her conscious will doesn't prevail, but the unconscious does, then you will realize that telling yourself, I am wonderful, is absurd. Because it's like increasing the distortion between the conscious and the unconscious. Because if the unconscious thinks it's worthless because it feels so small, and the conscious says, I am wonderful, what can the unconscious think? It doesn't even realize. My conscious mind is useless. It doesn't notice and gets upset. Then nothing sinks in. Instead, it creates a greater division between the conscious and unconscious.
And so metaphorically, that unconscious, does it need to be changed or understood?
To understand it. We have a brain, we have a mind, and we have intelligence. We don't come into the world to change anything about ourselves, but to understand it. And then it changes, not the other way around. Trying to change something without understanding it is forcing it. There is already repression in the unconscious.
And those unconscious dynamics that we all have, where are they forged? In childhood or throughout our entire life? Throughout our entire life.
What happens is that most people, when you're a child, you're very emotional usually, right? Children are pure emotion. They don't reflect or reason that much yet. So, as you grow up and start to see that you suffer, that there are things that frustrate you, things you don't like, things that scare you, you realize that with your thoughts, you can start to control your emotions. To hide it, to tense your body so it's not noticeable. So your thoughts become much stronger. So most people identify with their own thoughts and suppress their emotions. That works for a while. Until one day I was watching TV and suddenly I started having a rapid heartbeat, sweating, or I was out on the street and I started to feel dizzy. When repressed emotions reach a point where they become excessive, many problems start, like anxiety, depression, and sleep problems. So it builds up, and then there are a lot of people who struggle against it. What happens when you see techniques that tell you, think that you are wonderful, you can do so many hours of so many things? Anything that uses thought to force action will repress emotion and is counterproductive. Another thing is when you think, but well, then I'm not wonderful. Yes, we are all wonderful, but we have a series of problems that we need to solve. These problems won't be solved by thinking we're great, but by asking, what's happening with me? I have anger, I have envy, I have jealousy, I'm scared of things I don't like to admit, I'm proud. That's what needs to be resolved. And when you start resolving that, then that wonderful you is when it starts to come out.
Emerges.
Of course. Okay.
I understand. What role does one of the good approaches, probably the most popular, the most mainstream in the West right now, which is mindfulness, play in resolving suffering? What part is good and what part is bad about it?
Mindfulness comes from Vipassana meditation, which is a type of meditation practiced by the Buddha. We have traveled to many countries looking for all the techniques and what limitations they have. We practiced Vipassana meditation, which is the origin of mindfulness, and we saw that it has a positive side, but it is limited. The positive part is the ability to observe, to pay attention to the sensation. But the part that doesn't go any further is that it doesn't say anything about why it hurts here, does it? No, of course not, no.
Let's say it observes, but it doesn't interpret.
It doesn't discover, since interpreting could lead to mistakes. If you close your eyes and after a while you start to notice that one hand feels bigger and you say this big hand is because of such and such, you might be wrong. If you claim it's due to something and the hand stays the same, that's not true.
But ultimately working with patients is always an interpretation, right? No. So no, because...
Look, if you close your eyes and let's take an example, right? and you notice one hand is big and the other is small, and I tell you it's because of this and it doesn't change, that's false. Now, since I already know why it is, I tell you, look, this is happening to you because of this, because of that, and you say, my hand feels fine now.
But you knowing why it is, that's also your interpretation as a therapist, right? No.
We know it's not easy, but that's not the point. Explaining something is different from discovering it. So, giving it an explanation would be, actually, I suppose you've heard about the book Illness as a Path, right? Which later led to other books, like If This Hurts, it could be a problem with your parents, or this is a childhood trauma. And that's not really the case either. Actually, it depends on each person, how they create that repression, what factors are involved. Some things do repeat. Chest pain is a very common symptom. But there are other things that don't. So when you notice, for example, that someone has a tense neck, we say you're holding back your tears a bit, it seems like you're sad. And they stay there, they realize it. And that emotion, when they realize it, that emotion emerges in a different way. That's not an interpretation. And the
tension that
he realizes that he was sad. It's not that he thought he was sad, but that he connects with that sadness. Then that feeling evolves and changes. So, if what you're thinking is correct and you're connecting with your emotions, you're understanding it. That changes. So it's a discovery. Distancing yourself from emotion before interpreting it leads to thoughts that go nowhere.
All right, I understand. Okay. All right, and if you had to take a stand and say what the main causes of human suffering are, what would they be?
ignorance,
Ignorance.
not knowing oneself. Realize that nobody likes to suffer. So if we suffer, it's because we don't know. We don't know the unconscious, which is why it's called the unconscious. And what is the unconscious? It's where we keep everything we don't like. It keeps building up, creating one conflict after another. So not knowing who you are, not knowing what you're like, that causes a lot of suffering. And then once the suffering is there, there's a lot of interest in getting rid of it. And that leads to even more repression. Because the goal is to understand suffering, to understand its cause. And by understanding it, it disappears. Because the mind is information. We need to understand it. And when we understand, things change.
Okay, and what we understand, what we want to understand are those conditioning or behaviors we acquire after we're born? Or do we need to grasp a deeper spiritual essence you don't permit?
Both things. Look, anyway, within that lack of knowledge, we could say, okay, but what is the root?
Both things.
Anyway, even within that uncertainty, we could say, okay, but what is the root? The root of suffering is separation. It produces fear from the separation between each other, from the transcendence of life. So, when there is an egocentric movement that separates you from others, that's where fear arises, and everything that comes from fear, which is anger, competition, comparison, feelings of humiliation, inferiority, jealousy, hatred, envy. It gets complicated.
This also has quite a bit of Buddhism in it, the idea of the illusion of separation from the world, right? And the lack of unity that comes from the mind, right? The mind, in the end, the egocentric mind that separates us, right? From you, and from that thing, right? So, the origin of suffering is that separation, that distance, which comes from ignorance, of course, which comes from ignorance.
The first separation is from yourself. Of course, the first separation is that we separate from our inner self. And consequently, the mind will then start separating from others. Sometimes a couple comes in who don't get along. So the first problem is that one criticizes the other and the other criticizes back. No one stops to ask, what's happening to me? Okay, this person, my partner, is doing something wrong. But why do I get angry? No, we're trying to change the other person. Criticizing others causes anger and resentment even if you don't realize it. And where is that resentment? Inside oneself. Of course. So resentment harms the very person who creates it. It doesn't come from outside, it comes from within. So negative emotions harm the person who feels them. They don't hurt others, only you.
In any case, notice that unity is not exclusive to Buddhism. It's also present in the Catholic religion and other religions or philosophies. The problem is how to solve it. Buddhism mentions detachment, but how do you achieve it? Normally it's by trying to reject what attracts you. That again starts the process of repressing emotion with thought. That's why sometimes seeing people we've spent a long time with matters, We've been at a Buddhist monastery researching Buddhism, and in India studying Vipassana meditation. In other words, we've gone to the source to see what's really there. So most of the techniques are limited. At the very least, they're limited. And it's because of that mistake of wanting, instead of going towards what's wrong and learning how to solve it, to reject it and control it or try to sublimate it. There are many ways to distance yourself, or the opposite. That is thinking, well, I deserve this and I have to suffer. No, that's not it. There is a pain there that you have to learn how to resolve, and no technique is useful.
Okay, and there's a way to do that.
And that is to understand it.
And to understand, you have to be curious about understanding. If not, you can't.
I mean, pain, unravels like a knot when it's understood.
Yes, because pain is the effect of a conflict that you haven't resolved, that you haven't understood. Nobody wants to suffer, so if you do, something must be wrong. Something you haven't understood. Therefore, if you understand it, not just superficially, but in your subconscious, the pain disappears because pain is the effect.
Okay, interesting. And why do so many people go on spiritual journeys to get to know themselves? What does it mean to know yourself? I've asked this before, but I want to go further. What does knowing yourself mean? Who or what do you need to understand?
We prefer to say discover, because getting to know yourself might mean that in the end you come to conclusions about yourself, and that can be wrong. So I think people suffer and spend a lot of time searching. We, who have visited these countries to investigate, found many people spending much time in ashrams, seeking different gurus, and searching through meditation. I understand it. We understand it. You have to try to solve that, and if what you know doesn't help you, then you look for other things. The problem is that we usually find rigid techniques that don't go beyond control. Meditation techniques, except for Vipassana, which later leads to mindfulness, are mostly ways of repressing yourself.
Of course.
When you put up a facade to feel okay, what are you doing? Creating fake emotions?
Or when in Buddhism they say, and now imagine that you love the world. But what do I do with the hatred and anger I have inside? I repress it. I can't feel or generate love. That's fake. That's something created by thought. It's like deciding someone is wonderful. You start saying, oh, come on, they're wonderful. That thought creates emotions, not feelings. Emotion is created by thought, so it's fictitious and depends on what you choose to think. You have to go deeper to be able to resolve what makes us suffer, and then the other thing does emerge, otherwise it doesn't.
Okay, so in general, you think that all these traditions don't offer a solution either?
They're limited.
That's why there's more and more suffering, of course. Once we were in a monastery in the Himalayas, and we spent the days locked up in a very small cell, each of us isolated on the mountain, meditating. And what we did during meditation was observe. Especially Jesus and I, what we tried to do was investigate our own minds. But the technique they gave you was to recite a mantra. That doesn't help at all, because that doesn't help you investigate the mind. What you have to try is to delve into what happens inside yourself.
You could train your attention, right?
Attention.
If the exercise is about paying attention. I mean, what's good about Vipassana and mindfulness when it's done right, because there have been all kinds of variations, is that it helps you pay attention. Yes. The downside it usually has is that they tell you, no, just let the thought pass. So, paying attention helps you lose your fear of what you feel and gives you a certain calm. And that's true. And it's one of the best things because you don't get worked up. You don't need to repress. Repeating a mantra dulls your mind. Maybe you suffer less, but it's like taking a painkiller. Okay. It won't solve your problem, and visualizing is just imagining things, which can even be counterproductive.
We don't think it's bad for someone to use a technique to feel a bit more relaxed, like taking a painkiller if something hurts. But of course, they're just palliatives, yes.
Okay, of course. And do you think that, the average teenager today in 2026 is more disconnected from themselves, their body, and their emotions than 30 or 40 years ago?
I think humanity is largely disconnected from its inner self. If you think about it, what does the human mind do? It thinks. We don't need to watch TV, it's already within us. It spends all day thinking in images and words, and every thought produces emotions, and we're there on the surface. It's not easy to get in there. Because there's also a rejection of what's inside because we don't like it. So it's not easy. The mind is always distracted. Look at society. What do we pay them most for? Distractions. Soccer, movies? Okay. The mind needs to be distracted when in reality the path is the opposite, inward.
Have you guys ever been interested in psychedelic assisted therapies? I mean,
You never have? We're counterproductive.
counterproductive? That's interesting.
Well, look,
We have patients?
who have used ayahuasca and other substances,
LSD.
what happens with psychedelics is, it reminds me of a game from before, where you would hit hyperspace and you'd leave one place and appear in another, right? Yes. Well, this is similar. You take a substance that's going to alter your brain, and it's going to alter your consciousness, right? Okay? But it's like a lottery. That's why they say he had a bad trip. It's like going from your conscious to your unconscious without choosing or knowing how to deal with it, and you're going to have an experience. So, of course, a lot of people say no, but I've had an experience that gave me a different perspective on life. It's true. You've seen that the mind or life isn't just this. That's fine. Of course, it's risky, like playing roulette, because the opposite can happen. You might end up in a part of your subconscious that's in really bad shape, and you'll have a terrible time. Plus, you don't have the tools to deal with it.
But in the end, it reveals parts of the mind we usually don't see.
What happens is that it can be a terrifying thing. Yes, that's true. So it's much better to say, okay, there's an unconscious there. Instead of taking something that's going to make you jump, you don't know where to, and without tools to face it, what we do is learn how to face what comes up, learn how to deal with the emotion, how to reflect on it. And that gives you the ability to keep facing whatever comes up. So it's like a transfer between your ability to face your unconscious and how the unconscious starts to diminish because you keep resolving things. And when that horrible thing that's inside is there, which a lot of people have, the shadow, what they used to call the dark side, the dark side, the dark side. You approach it with a different attitude, with a different way of seeing it, with different tools. Of course.
Now I understand. Of course, what you're saying is that it's really reckless to throw yourself into the dark battlefield of your unconscious without the tools to face it.
It's like if they grab you from here and throw you into a war, right in the middle, without you knowing if you'll be in a good place or a bad place. So it's very risky. And it can also lead to addiction to the substance because you haven't developed your ability to get there on your own.
Okay, I understand. And you've called your school introspection. Why is that word so important to you, and what is introspection really?
Well, we called it that because we didn't know what else to name it. Actually, we've specialized in understanding the mind, the human mind. So for that, you have to go inside yourself. We can't theorize about what the mind is because then we're operating in the unconscious. We have to go inside, not with thought, but with attention. And when you go inside, you're doing introspection. That is going within yourself. And what is within yourself? The unconscious. And once you manage to put the unconscious in order, you can go further. But for now, you have to put the unconscious in order.
Look, that connects exactly with what I wanted to ask you, which is, you talk a lot about putting the mind in order, right? A disordered mind creates pain, yes. And what is a disordered mind?
Well, there are many symptoms. Not being able to stop thinking, having something repeat itself in your mind. There are some very obvious things, right? OCD, which many people say is like having an internal threat that forces them
to do it. OCD could be a paradigmatic example of a very disordered mind, yes.
Yes, it causes a lot of suffering. Maybe putting it that way sounds worse, right? But certainly people who have OCD, there is a disorder in their mind, and that causes a lot of suffering. But when you can't stop thinking or can't sleep because you're worried about something, when you believe something that's not true about yourself and you're fighting against something that's not true, like believing that you're not valuable. So there are symptoms that make you suffer less maybe, and there are others that make you suffer a lot. So actually all of humanity has a disordered mind.
If humanity, let's say, if the whole collection of human beings had one mind, that mind would be pretty disordered, right? Like if it had one person, or if we personified all human beings and it was a global collective mind, it would be a bit of a crazy mind, right?
Pretty disordered.
The collective unconscious.
Yeah, something like that.
It's messy, which is why the world is like this.
You just have to look at how the world is going.
We're still killing each other. It's crazy. Of course, I still don't know.
Do you know Eckhart Tolle? You probably do, The Power of Now. He said in his book something like the human mind has killed I don't know how many millions of people in the 21st century, and that if we considered that, if we observed it in a neutral and objective way, we could say it's a crazy mind, right? That it's a mind that causes harm, that suffers, that causes harm, and
that doesn't know how to do it any other way. It's a disaster. We keep killing each other.
Of course. So what do you think about the work of, for example, I really like this author. I've read The Power of Now a lot, and I don't know, for some reason it calms me, you know? What are its strengths and limitations? Ultimately, it's about returning to the present moment, right?
Well, we haven't read much of Descartes, but we do see that he has taken a lot from Krishnamurti. Many of Descartes' theories come from Krishnamurti. Later, they're more distorted, but so we can tell you more about Krishnamurti, who says many things, who delves deeply into understanding, into intellectual understanding, let's say. Then you have to put it into practice in a different way.
But the mistake of the hour and what has come from it in the present and so on, the power of the hour. If the now is a depression, what power does that have? So, what would the power of now be? People mistake being present for being okay. Being in the present doesn't have to mean being okay. And then, can you be outside of the present?
No, we're literally trapped in the present.
Okay, so you can be in the present thinking about the future, you can be in the present thinking about the past, you can be entertained, or you can be calm. So, what the present gives you is the opportunity to understand what's happening. Actually, it's always there. So it's not the present, but awareness. It's about being aware and understanding what's happening. If you're thinking about the future, why? If you're thinking about the past, why? If you're distracted, why? What's in there distracting you? So for us, it's not enough. There are things that have happened, like emotional intelligence, which put the focus on emotions that seemed like they didn't exist. But it's not enough because those are mechanical solutions and that doesn't work. For example, Eckhart Tolle, if I remember correctly, says a lot about letting go. You have to let go. And how do you do that? We have patients who say, I try to let go, but I can't. That just doesn't work.
It's about understanding, not letting go. You don't have to let go of anything. In the present moment, what matters is attention. When you're in the present, you're attentive to reality. Then your thoughts stop. But you can't force that, because if it could be done, we would all do it. Of course, we're not idiots. The problem is that there's no attention because there's no curiosity about what's wrong, but rather we're looking for what's right. Humanity chases after whatever is put in front of it. Instead of saying, let's see what's wrong, let's see how I can solve it, and thought comes to a stop.
That's unrelated, but do you believe in God?
We don't believe.
We don't know that he exists.
Do you know where that comes from?
From a perception?
Thank you. From a reality perspective. Do you believe in God?
I mean, do you feel it? Good question. The short answer would be yes, but not in a God. I believe in God, not in a God, not in this God or that God or this God.
Well, we would have to talk
About what religions are, right? Religions, no.
For me, God is a more physical concept than a religious one. It's a concept that's more present in nature, right? Than religious or ritualistic, whatever we want to call it, right?
But would it have consciousness?
Or would it be consciousness?
Or would it be consciousness?
I'll go with the second part. That's it.
Yes.
Well, this could be a whole different episode, but I'm interested in going back to that organization of the mind, right? In the end, okay, the mind is disordered, it generates suffering, correct? Does the mind organize itself just by understanding it or not?
It's by itself, but by understanding it,
Disorder is a lack of understanding. Do we agree? When someone thinks that what's happening is that they're a really good person, but they have anger and say, that's not me. Not many people say that. They say, suddenly I felt a tremendous anger, but that's not me. No, that's a part of you. And what you have to do is resolve it, not deny it. That creates a distortion in the mind, that creates a split in the mind between what you believe and reality. That's the disorder, because that disorder creates division within yourself. Of course, and that causes suffering. Some people say, I don't know what's happening to me. I'm usually very sociable, but recently I walked into a place and started shaking and sweating. Well, there's a part of yourself you don't know. They immediately say, that's not me. No, yes, it is you, and you have to deal with it. Okay. Then denying reality creates confusion in the mind. It causes suffering.
Okay, very, very interesting. So, well, I think we're already starting to understand a question I wanted to ask you, which is why there are people who have been going to therapy every week for 10 or 15 years religiously and are still feeling unwell.
We have a lot of people who have been to the psychologist many times, and they are the best patients we have. But since they've tried 1,000 techniques, when they come and see what we do, they say, pfft. They cry with emotion because they really see that there is a way forward. People suffer and go to many psychologists and many places searching because people are looking not to suffer, but the techniques out there are just palliatives.
One part, psychology is very theoretical, right? And in practice, well, now it's developing a bit more. But it's a bit like sometimes we read articles that say, psychology says this. I think psychology, who could that be? Because in psychology, each psychologist has their own view, and we don't agree with what we read there. So it's generalized, and each psychologist, as they see fit, says, well, this must be how it is. Because there are many things that don't have studies about what's being shared. It's simply based on intuition, on what they've experienced. So there are approaches that are very limited, most of them, and then there are, let's say, therapies that they also call it accompaniment, which we dislike as well. No, I'm doing accompaniment. You're not. That's what his mother does. His mother accompanies him to places. You have to help him understand what's going on. Some patients, as María mentioned, come from elsewhere and say, I shared my problems and saw he became anxious, which made me think, I don't want you anxious. I want your help and solutions.
And with the thousands and thousands of psychologists out there, in your school, other psychologists are being trained. Why aren't there more people trying to learn, a way to solve suffering, right? Which in the end is something human and that affects all of us. Why not?
Don't you think this should be taught to children in school?
If it really solves suffering, yes, the answer is yes.
The answer is, if something hurts you and you run away from it, do you solve it? If you have an infected wound and just put a bandage on it, does that solve the problem?
No, it gets worse. It gets infected.
It gets worse. So we can see that if we run away from what makes us suffer, we can't solve it. If we try to cover it up with 1,000 techniques, because above all, the human mind has specialized in how to escape suffering. There are all kinds of ways to escape suffering, 1,000 distractions, 1,000 ways to convince yourself. The other day we heard someone say, the brain isn't programmed to be happy. Well, excuse me, the brain isn't programmed, it's an organ. You're the one who has problems. There are so many theories and techniques to escape suffering, which is why it remains unresolved. And our suggestion is don't escape. You have anxiety, let's go into it. Let's investigate it. Close your eyes. Where is it? How does it affect you? Let's put all your attention on the anxiety or on the depression or on the distress so that you can resolve the fear of anxiety itself or so that you can be able to resolve the fear of fear. And then there's no longer a struggle against what you're feeling, but instead you start to become curious and say, wow, I can observe it. What is this? And look, it moves and goes over here. And that's when it starts to become possible to resolve it. A child should know how to do that. In fact, sometimes a child has come to the center and we ask them and they say, I feel a lot of anger toward my little brother. And we ask, and where do you feel it? And they do this. I feel fury in my heart. That's what a little child told us. It was very clear to him. Children are very clear about it. It's over time that you start to distance yourself from what you feel and you don't even know what you feel anymore.
And how do you work with that child who in the end...
He observes the fury. He observes it, watch it, and he describes it to you. And he says, it's fury. My heart, they say, is red and tight or something. Okay, and why? And do you like that? No. So what good does it do you? Does it hurt your little brother? No. Who gets hurt? Me. We explain it to him. Why are you angry? This is what's happening. You have this fear. And the heart goes away. Not the physical heart. The physical heart is fine. But he starts to understand and it gets resolved. But you have to get closer to the pain, not move away from it.
Anyway, there's something there. Since we've been doing this for so long, for example, when I was studying, the most popular therapy was cognitive behavioral, and psychoanalysis was kind of looked down upon. Now there's a lot of focus on trauma and attachment, so that perspective is coming back a bit, that there's something more than just cognitive behavioral approaches, acting and thinking. Emotion had been left out. Then there's an attempt, rational emotive therapy, to try to bring emotion in. But they also do it in a very rational way. So what we see is that things are moving forward. Even if it's in zigzags, it's moving forward. Now, trauma is once again something important to address. But it still doesn't seem to be well understood that it's not just about saying, well, I have the trauma, I do a release, an emotional catharsis, and that's it. No. You have to understand what wrong conclusions you came to when you experienced that trauma. Those mistaken conclusions are like a clock's mechanism. So if you don't uncover that conclusion, of course you feel some relief, but it's not enough. So when you connect with the emotion and stop being afraid of it, that's when you can discover what those wrong ideas are. That would be the next step. For example, techniques like focusing can help you feel the emotion. It goes in that direction, but what's missing is realizing that once you feel the emotion, you shouldn't, like they do now with mindfulness, try to change your way of thinking. That is to say, okay, now I feel the pain, and now what I'm going to do is do this. No, don't go away. Keep going deeper to see what else is in there. Why did that come up?
Do you work with patients with trauma? Yes.
Of course.
Yes, no.
Most people have traumas, you're right. Well,
I don't know if you know the Canadian author Gabor Mate, who talks a lot about trauma, and in the end his main thesis is that, well, unresolved trauma is like a very powerful chronic stressor that's also behind it. Not only, but it's another risk factor for certain physical illnesses, and he often links certain patterns with certain physical illnesses, right? Certain physical illnesses. So trauma is also addressed in the same way by understanding it. I mean, for example, childhood sexual abuse. How? What do you do? The patient comes and tells you, no, it's just that I was abused when I was 8 years old.
And that doesn't solve the problem. I mean, there are people who come in who don't remember it, and we see that something sexual happened to them, but they don't remember it.
How can you tell it's sexual if he doesn't say so?
by what they discuss, their problems and experiences.
And by the unconscious, I mean,
There it is. By the narrative he tells you about his life, or from the questions you ask him, you can tell that there's something.
part of it. Another is by what their unconscious is like. But he doesn't know it. But even if he did, knowing that someone has raped you doesn't resolve the trauma. You have to go deeper, because what's left there is a trauma, a bunch of ideas that are hurting him like a ticking time bomb inside.
I mean, what hurts him is not just the physical act itself, obviously, but also his own narrative afterward.
I'm not worth anything.
They've humiliated me, they've crossed all my boundaries, I'm helpless in the face of the world, right?
I'm a bad person. It was me who provoked them. There are children who tell us, even as adults, that their whole life they've thought it was them who provoked it. I mean, there are some very confusing ideas left there. So the mind works with ideas, and an idea is an experience, an interpretation, and an emotion that comes from that. That's a knot that creates a trauma. And now we have to look at what the event was, what the interpretation was, and what the emotion was. For example, if as a child you are bitten by a dog and your mind experiences the pain and says, dogs are dangerous, and that stays there. And now you say, well, now I see dogs and I like dogs. But if one comes close, I start to tremble and I say, why is this happening to me if I like dogs? Well, it's because there's an idea, a knot from the past that needs to be undone.
It's the same with phobias, right? I imagine it's similar. Phobia.
We often say something I find useful. The fact itself, whatever it is, can't be changed. You can't change the fact itself, no matter how hard it is, but you can change the impact it left, your thoughts, conclusions, and emotions, and free yourself from it.
And indeed, a trauma or a conflict causes somatic illnesses. Yes, there is a mind-body connection. They are not separate.
Yes, this man, Gabor Mate, for example, talks a lot about the relationship between type C personality, people who don't know how to set boundaries, who don't know how to say what they want for themselves, and who are overly accommodating to others, right?
They're really afraid of rejection.
He often relates fear of rejection to cancer, for example.
What happens is that we've also researched it a bit in that area. This started with Dr. Hammer. I suppose you've heard of him.
It sounds familiar, yes?
About cancer and the possibility that it might be related to a trauma. And sometimes we believe that there is a connection, but there isn't it's like dreams, right? So if you dream about snakes, it's because of this. But what if you work with snakes at the zoo? The meaning can't be the same for someone who likes them as for someone who doesn't. So are there personal factors that make it not so, or we believe it's not so direct?
That it's not a direct causal relationship, obviously.
No, it's not that simple, but of course there is a relationship, obviously.
Of course, well, in the end, you don't have to get into anything esoteric. If it's something that makes you suffer consciously or unconsciously, in this case, unconsciously, that's suffering. It's a risk factor. It alters hormones, pro-inflammatory molecules, let's say. It's just another risk factor. We're not saying it's the most important one, not even. But it's like, well, if you smoke and you also have work stress and you also have this kind of stress that isn't visible, then it's just another risk factor. Exactly.
Of course, and if you smoke, it's for a reason. You're using tobacco to suppress something. I mean, the mind directly influences the body. It's the same thing. They're connected.
Mm-hmm. Vale. All right. I'm Dr. Borja Bandera. In this case, no, but I do encounter this both with my patients and among audiences, followers, and so on. People who know perfectly well everything that needs to be done and have the theory pretty well established. But time and again, they fail in their attempt to have good habits. They sabotage themselves in 1,001 ways, sometimes very creatively. What is going on there, or what can we say about this type of person? You probably work with many people and see this often. It happens with obesity, other behavioral issues, and drug addiction. What's happening here?
Look, there are people who, for example, really suffer from obesity, especially in this society where it's so frowned upon. Of course, an obese person is considered despicable. Of course, we have people who have been obese or are obese, and they tell me that people insult them on the street. I remember a lady who was obese, and she said, people insult me on the street.
Look, yesterday I was talking to a friend about how in Japan, the obesity rate is much lower because it's radically frowned upon in their society. Or if you work for a big company and start gaining weight, they'll send you a letter telling you to lose weight or you can't keep your job. That's crazy. So in the end, that also really shapes people's behavior.
Yes. So nobody likes to be obese because it's usually socially frowned upon, and yet there are people who just can't stop eating. They don't want to, they just can't. They know what to do and have tried countless diets, doing everything right, but that's only the conscious part. Willpower doesn't help us. There is a stronger force, which is the unconscious. If the unconscious is afraid, let's say it's afraid because it has suffered a trauma and believes it's going to starve, it will push you to eat. If it's afraid of loneliness and feels it in the stomach, it will push you to eat. If there is anything unresolved, it will push you to eat. And even if the person doesn't want to, they won't be able to resist. The same thing happens with tobacco. And with tobacco, what happens? The smoke from tobacco means less oxygen reaches the brain, and that makes emotions feel less intense. You don't do it consciously. People who smoke already know they shouldn't smoke. There are many people who say, I'm smoking and it terrifies me, I'm going to get cancer, but I just can't stop. What's going on there? There's a problem in the unconscious that pushes them to smoke. If they don't resolve it...
You can clearly see our point about the conscious and the unconscious. Someone takes your advice and says the plan sounds great. They'll exercise, eat well, and try to sleep 8 hours, as often suggested for anxiety. But what if they can't sleep because the anxiety itself prevents it? But well, when that person doesn't have too much conflict, maybe they start doing it and they manage to do it, they feel better and pick up the habit. Very good. But when there's resistance, it's because there's some kind of problem, because there's a part that wants to, but there's another part that doesn't want to. So the part that doesn't want to is the one that comes up with strategies to keep you from doing it. If you don't become aware of why you don't want to do something that deep down you actually do want to do, or that you know is supposed to be good for you, it's because there's some kind of conflict.
And which part, of course, I find this very powerful, which part of yourself might not want to be healthier or have a certain body weight? Let's talk about a case.
For example, someone who couldn't lose weight.
For example,
People who came, who wanted to, needed to exercise and couldn't manage to do it. Investigating with him, why is part of him resistant? When he starts exercising, he mistreats himself. He doesn't just go to the gym and settle for it. He has to lift more than others. He compares himself. He starts demanding more from himself. Every day he wants to do more. And when he's done that several times, there's a part that starts. The mind is sometimes like a scale. If you go to one side, you go to the other. So if you demand too much from yourself, you're increasing laziness. And laziness is what won't let you go to the gym. So when people demand too much from themselves, it's very hard for them, because after suffering several times at the gym, irrationally pushing themselves, the emotional part starts to withdraw. When you think, let's go to the gym, but suddenly feel your motivation drop. And after the drop, you say tomorrow, But the drop is what happens in between. It's like a lack of energy. just from thinking about going to the gym. If that isn't resolved, it's a struggle against yourself that you'll end up losing.
One time, a lady came in who was obese and was suffering a lot because people looked down on her, and I was also talking with her. We saw that what was happening to her was that, as a child, she had suffered bullying and had been bullied because she was a very beautiful, very thin girl, and she had been mistreated both at home and at school. And she started eating, and now as an adult, she couldn't stop eating. Why? Because she was afraid of envy and being attacked by others. She wasn't aware, she didn't want to. But she couldn't stop eating. Her subconscious had assumed that the best way to protect herself was to be overweight, because a pretty and beautiful woman.
Of course, being thin meant danger. People who come in with anxiety and are on sick leave, and maybe the source of their stress was work, they start to get better, they start to improve, and usually there's a point where they stop improving. They're doing really well, and then at some point they usually stop. And that's because, without realizing it, they anticipate that if they get completely better, they'll have to go back to work. They don't know why, but they stop doing what's best for them.
That's also a very important topic. Do you think that sometimes there's a psychological benefit to being sick no matter what the illness is?
Of course, obesity, what we're telling you, there's a psychological benefit that gives her security. It gives her security that people despise her, because the security comes from being despised, of course, because she suffered. Once this person told us she was thrown downstairs and suffered several broken bones. So for her, it was very dangerous to be envied because she was pretty. So her way of protecting herself was by being obese. I insist she didn't know this.
It's not a real benefit.
Real?
It's a strategy to avoid suffering that creates even more suffering.
Because she hasn't managed to overcome her fear of being envied and attacked. For her, being thin meant being beautiful, being envied, and being attacked, and her life was in danger. Since she couldn't solve it, she protected herself by gaining weight.
But then she suffered for not being thin.
But then, of course, the suffering of her present reality would come. Of course.
It's complicated. That's very painful.
Well, I imagine that every case is its own world and every story is different, right? Yes. Of course, you also talk a lot about the divided mind, what a divided mind is, and why this also causes suffering.
A bit with what we've been talking about, you can already see it, right? When there's a conflict that someone doesn't know how to resolve and tends to repress it, it's as if they've created a fragment of themselves. Then that goes into the unconscious. So there are times when, for example, it would be the inner child. We say it's not just one, there are several. And there are children, adults, teenagers. With each difficult situation, it's as if you create a part of yourself. And when you start to face what you feel and start to see what's going on inside, you realize that when you resolve a conflict, it's like you gain energy. It's very curious. So, mental division happens when there's a conflict. That's why you can think contradictory things. That's why you can think you're magnificent one day and horrible the next. Or that you can take on the world one day and the next day you feel like you can't. Because there are different parts of him that have, let's say, become uncoordinated, so they act separately. And acting separately creates conflict.
Or, for example, in couples, sometimes one partner comes and says, my partner is very destructive, I want to leave them, but there's another part of me that can't. And what happens there? Do you want to leave them? Yes. Then why don't you? I don't know, I can't. Then there's a contradiction between the conscious and the unconscious. So that's the division, conscious and unconscious. The conscious is like what you have believed you are, and the unconscious is what you don't like.
And do you think there are people who are truly whole? Undivided people?
There are 8 billion of us.
There must be someone, right?
Come on.
But anyway, what really interests me is this unity in the whole person, the Buddha. It's the total absence of suffering, complete unity and understanding.
Maybe Buddha, Jesus?
Christ, it's where there is no unconscious.
Where is there no unconscious? No, everything is conscious.
There's no conflict now. The unconscious is made up of conflicts. When you ill,
the unconscious can't be good. Everything is conflict.
The unconscious is what you refuse to see.
Speaking in psychological terms, that you're not aware you've touched your hair, maybe that doesn't matter at all. Of course. But if there's psychological conflicts, then yes.
We call something unconscious when you are not aware of it. So you refuse to understand because you're scared. If you manage to get in there and resolve it, there's no longer any need for the unconscious. Once you understand your fear, anger, or hatred, you've resolved it, so there's no longer a conscious and unconscious split. You are already one.
In any case, if we're saying that maybe it's exceptional human beings who are in that state, One might think then, but the closer you get to that state, the better off you are. So even if it's a long journey, and even if you say, well, maybe I won't make it in this lifetime, right? But I'm getting better and better. Why not take this path? I'm resolving my conflicts and I'm getting better. And I see that I can face life in a different way. And I feel good much more often. And when a problem comes up, now I know how to solve it, how to face it, even if it takes me some time. So it's a fantastic journey. So it's not so much about reaching the end, which we will, but rather saying, well, this is the journey, the journey.
Is there some need or personal desire in your lives that will lead you down this path of understanding suffering?
I'm not sure if desire is the right word.
The search came from seeing that something was missing. Something was missing. It couldn't be that life was just this, where everyone suffers and everyone blames themselves or others. It's like a battle. Life is like a battle of suffering. It can't be. There has to be another way. And that's what pushed us to investigate. Our own mind is the first thing, of course.
And don't you think that the closest we are to that undivided mind is when we're children in the early years, perhaps?
Or would that require a new topic?
As children in the early years.
Let's see, the moments of greatest happiness and purity that I remember and the most unity with my surroundings were when I was a child. And maybe they haven't happened again.
No.
Because when you're a child, let's say you are there with your conscious mind, your brain is new, not your mind, but your brain is. So you're there with your consciousness. Your unconscious hasn't integrated with you yet.
There's hardly any unconscious, right?
But little by little, it will start to integrate.
I mean, that's where we would have to, I think that would be enough for another podcast because kids don't start from zero.
Or do you think they do?
Well, surely they have conditioning from their fathers and mothers.
No, before that.
Don't you see little children? Don't you see what they are? Sometimes you look at two kids and can already tell what kind of personality each will have. And they're very little babies.
The parents say this one is different. They noticed it as soon as he was born. So, of course, science tries to find, well, maybe it's something in the mother's womb, the genes, but what if it's not that? And what if it turns out that there is a consciousness and there is a body? If there is a consciousness and there is a body, and the body dies, we would have to see if the consciousness continues, which can be verified.
That's more about how it can be verified, not with the unconscious. Near-death experience?
No, by investigating?
No. When you go in there and start to see that inside there's another you who's going to talk to you and tells you what they think and that they don't agree and so on, and you say, who is this? It's you, but it's not the unconscious. You are the unconscious that is able to make a hand big, a foot long, move the head. That's no longer part of the physical body, but that's in the body, yet beyond it. Then it doesn't die with the body. But you have to experience that.
The ideal thing is to experience it. And then there are many events that happen, like near-death experiences, sleep paralysis syndrome, many experiences that people talk about who haven't had hallucinations. So there are many things you can realize, and then by investigating within yourself, you see that there is something there that is not the body. And that something that is not the body, if you realize that it will continue, then it's no longer the body. So when it comes from zero.
Yes, well, I understand in the end, but, well, I think it's a question without an answer. At least I don't think we have the tool. What is clear is that the phenomenology of many people in different contexts, for example, near-death experiences or taking psychedelics, is that sensation is also experienced. Yes.
Of being out of the body.
A sense of being out of the body or of pure consciousness and connection with everything, right? Yes. It's something consensual or common, right? It's transversal to the human experience in certain altered states of consciousness. But what we need to see is whether it's the result of doing this to the brain, either with drugs or with a near-death experience or something like that, or if it's really something fundamental that's there and that we access in those states, right? Of course. I mean, is it generated by the brain or is it a physical property of the universe that we access in those moments?
We know that it's not generated by the brain, and when you start resolving your unconscious, it's easier to perceive it firsthand.
But you know it experientially?
Yes, of course, just like this table is here.
You know, because you've been there and seen it, right? Okay, well.
I mean, we didn't say anything in theory. So, we've done our research and we know how it works. It's not so...
It's not difficult. It's just that humanity is on a path from here outward. When you start turning inward, it's not that difficult. It's not that complicated.
Very interesting. Honestly, it would be just like you say to experience it, right?
Of course, that's the best way to find out.
At that point, it's no longer just theory.
Yes. All right, let's get into the topic of...
Sorry to interrupt you. Yes.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Can you regain the innocence of childhood in the questions you ask? How? By resolving conflicts?
By being undivided?
Yes. Let's say moving toward that. You don't have to be perfect. When you were a child, you weren't perfect either, and yet you still enjoyed life.
No, but I realized that it was much easier for me to be in the present and not in my mind.
And enjoy.
And the mind had much less strength. Exactly. And life just flowed on its own.
Then, that's it. The mind. We'd also have to define that, but anyway. The thought, the rational part, starts gaining strength to escape from fear. If you take away its strength, resolving the fear, you return to that state, even as an adult.
All right, okay. Good personal work, yes. Quickly, let's talk about pop neuroscience. What do you think? I
already like the word you've used.
Yes, pop neuroscience, right? In the end, it's now the idea that, well, if I feel stressed, it's because of cortisol. If I feel unmotivated, it's because of dopamine. If I feel sad, it's because of serotonin. And in the end, reducing everything to biology so that there's always a chemical culprit I can modify, either by taking cold baths or taking medication or doing whatever, right? What do you think about this?
Well, neuroplasticity, which is what part of all this is based on, is actually something that was already known. Now, the biological and physiological mechanisms are being better understood. So, if you look at it closely, let's say the current goes from the mind to the brain. In other words, you get stressed, and that can generate brain activity. Just like if you want to move your foot, you decide to move your foot, which is not the brain, because we are constantly reading. Your brain does this and that to you, but who is it actually affecting? If your brain does this to you, someone else must experience it too. But who? Is it the brain itself? That can't be right. So, there is a mind, it's you, the one who acts upon the brain. When you want to move a foot, somehow you've learned to make your brain react and the foot moves. If the spinal cord is damaged, the command won't pass through. But the brain doesn't decide to move the foot. So how is that? Well, physically, psychologically, it's the same. If someone gets stressed, of course there will be brain activity, which is what they're measuring now with the studies they're doing in neuroscience. But they're mistaken in thinking brain activity produces the mental state. It's the opposite. The mental state causes that in the brain. Brain activity can impact the body. You can see that later. We read articles and we say, okay, what do they propose as a solution? What is being proposed? Company. Exercise, rest. Of course, it's the same. It doesn't work.
Of course, exercising is very healthy, but that's not the solution.
Of course, for psychological problems, what they're suggesting isn't going to work. Knowing that's what happens in the brain when you have a psychological problem is great. If the problem is physiological, acting on the brain will help. But if the problem is psychological, it won't work. You can't. How was it? Oxytocin. They said, eat pasta. Italians should be happy. If eating pasta generates oxytocin, and oxytocin generates happiness, then of course that's not how it works.
Okay. Going back to the point about isolation, which we already consider an epidemic, and it's true that it seems like we all tend to take refuge in, I don't know what, in social media, in screens, in distractions. What does that do? I mean, what I see is that there is less and less human incentive to connect with each other. I mean, or maybe we've lost. I don't know if it's the satisfaction of connecting with each other, and it's like we defend ourselves from possible harm. I'm not sure what, by isolating and taking refuge. Why are we becoming more isolated?
Because of fear. I mean, people are very afraid of suffering. And in our relationships with others, that's where what we carry inside comes out. That's why we said that isolating yourself to get to know yourself isn't enough. Because that's like locking yourself in a laboratory, but then there's the real practice. What really comes up, which is in the unconscious, is when I interact with people.
In other words, people, others are a means for us to see ourselves.
To see the relationship more than the relationship itself.
The relationship. I mean, if I interact with someone who wants to put themselves above me, and that makes me feel bad and I get angry, then I start blaming them. And now I have a problem. I've already gone from myself to them. And what I have to do is say, oh, look, this person is trying to put themselves above me. And I'm feeling bad. What's going on inside me? I'm going to observe. Look, I have a feeling of inferiority or I'm afraid of being looked down on. And that's why I feel bad. So that's what I'm investigating. If I feel bad and blame someone else, I'll suffer. And since people usually do that, I feel bad about that person and that person is to blame. I start to feel anger and so on. This person's toxic. I'm out. I'm leaving. There are more and more problems with relationships with others. There comes a time when most people are toxic for you. So what's the solution? I isolate myself.
And also because now we have the possibility that maybe isolating yourself isn't seen as such a bad thing. Let me see if I can put it into words. Before, to end a marriage, to end a friendship, since we had that feeling that we didn't have so many contacts, I think people used to hesitate more before ending any kind of relationship because of a conflict. Now, in our hyper-connected world, we have many so-called friends who aren't really friends, right? With more fluid or changing relationships or more dating apps and such, it's like we're less afraid to break up here in order to start something new over there, right? We're breaking up, starting over, breaking up again, and ending up alone because we lack strong, lasting relationships. Everything always feels very rootless. Exactly.
So, I think another factor is, what makes someone isolate themselves is the fear of suffering, right? Because of others, right?
The fear that someone will hurt you.
That's it, right? Good. Not necessarily that someone will hurt you, because maybe it's you comparing yourself and feeling inferior, and you don't want to feel that way, and maybe the other person isn't doing anything.
Right, but you think the other person makes you feel inferior?
That's another mistake people often make, blaming the other person for how you feel, right? But, okay, so as relationships become less solid, there's more and more insecurity. As there's more and more insecurity, there's also more competitiveness in relationships. More and more people go into relationships wanting to receive, and that creates tension. They're deteriorating and relationships are less solid. When there was less competitiveness because life was simpler, this challenge was smaller, and it's feeding back on itself. What happens is that you see suffering. We sometimes say that suffering is like a dead end. There comes a point when you have to change direction because you can't get out that way. You can break up with all your partners, but there comes a point when you say, if I keep going like this, I'm going to end up alone. So you force yourself to rethink things and understand what's happening.
Because people, well, I imagine it's a pretty visceral fear, and it also has to do with our evolutionary past. But why are we so afraid of being alone or of enjoying? Why is it so hard to enjoy solitude and being with oneself? It seems like being alone with yourself is also seen as a threat, right? Yes, that's how it is. You say, well, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to lie on the couch, but without my phone, without Netflix, and without reading a book. And I think very few people can tolerate that anymore, just being with themselves doing nothing.
Yes, because look, one of the things that has happened is that since there is a conscious and an unconscious that we are disconnected from, that has created an inner emptiness. You're not in touch with yourself, you're disconnected and dissociated. And that has created an emptiness inside that is scary. So when you stay at home and you don't listen to music, you don't read, you don't dance, nothing. You just stay in silence and pay attention. A voice starts to form inside you, one that people run away from. So what we say is, no, don't run away, go into it. See how deep it is, observe it, investigate it. That emptiness means you're disconnected from yourself. And what you need to do is connect. Then you have to lose your fear of emptiness so you can explore it and reconnect with yourself. When someone is alone and afraid of being alone, it's because they're afraid of themselves. They don't like what's inside, so they run away. And what you have to do is the opposite, with compassion. That is, if I have something wrong here, you'll find a solution, we'll fix it.
A common pattern, right? In that emptiness, that ball of fire, people fill it with things, right? Fill it with substances, fill it with going out compulsively, or with doing things, or with work.
With activity, that's what I was going to say. Activity is what people use the most. Being active, going, coming, doing things, grabbing the phone. Of course, the phone is a resource now, because right away,
super easy.
Right? You're doing something and seeing things and feeling things with what you're watching.
But then your therapy and ultimately healing involves, in this case, the way you put it, sometimes activity is counterproductive. It's the enemy of looking inside.
When you're escaping something, activity is fine.
I think almost all of us are running away from something, right? In the end.
Yeah. But the activity itself isn't negative. What's negative is using the activity to escape from yourself. Of course, there's no escaping yourself. You're in there. So ideally, whatever activity you have, just pay attention to how you react inside. Don't blame yourself, don't blame others, but be curious. Don't justify yourself, don't run away from what's there, but be curious to see what's there. So you can be active, but at the same time attentive, not for nothing. One thing here, one thing there. As we were saying, the mind takes a lot of control to escape from what's really there.
Something there. As we were saying, the mind takes a lot of control to escape from what's inside. So, when you're active, you're thinking and acting and feeling according to what you're doing. That's why most people look for things that make them feel good. They're active and experiencing emotions from their actions. If you stop, then thought starts to gain a lot of strength because it's controlling the emotions you have repressed. You may have heard of a study where people could choose between doing nothing for a while or getting a small electric shock.
They preferred the shock.
And they preferred the shock, just imagine that. So why? Because when you stop, everything inside starts to close in on you.
Yes, Kike, I imagine that's also one of the reasons why people suffer more at night when they go to bed.
Because they have to stop.
Because they have no other choice, right? Yes. Interesting. You've also written about excessive self-demand, right? That's something we see too, I think, more and more. Yes, there's a Korean philosopher who said that basically we've abolished slavery, but now we enslave ourselves.
That's right.
And where does it come from? This too, I admit, could even be good for me on a personal level. Where does that desire come from to push yourself to the limit, to give your best, and to always keep improving to the point where it stops being functional?
Notice that when someone does that, and I think it's widespread in society right now, it's because that self-demand is a search for perfection, you know? But it's a search for external perfection. I mean, a search for perfection in what is seen. Because that's being done at the expense of repressing what's inside. Therefore, it's fear of rejection from others, of criticism, of judgment. And deep down, it's fear of rejection and loneliness, of abandonment. Deep down, there's a fear of feeling inferior. To avoid feeling inferior, you pressure yourself instead of addressing the feeling itself.
What do you do? Once again, digging deeper?
Looking at it, not just being aware of it with your thoughts, because thoughts lie. They can tell you one thing today and something else tomorrow. The interesting thing is to use your thoughts intelligently, to investigate where it comes from, what it's like, but then go inside and connect with the feeling of inferiority. Because that feeling of inferiority, you can discover that you have it because you compare yourself. You compare yourself and feel inferior, sometimes superior, because you feel insecure. You don't know who you are, so you're fluctuating. So the best thing you can do is say, no, now I'm going to use my mind to investigate this problem. Why am I demanding so much of myself? I'll try to be less hard on myself and face my fear of things not working out. I'll try not to be so hard on myself. And when I compare myself to others, I'll notice what I'm comparing and how feeling inferior affects me. And why I feel that way. Or maybe dig a little deeper into that problem.
Another factor is that self-demand leads to treating yourself poorly.
Yes.
People who are demanding of themselves reach a point where
it's never enough.
Never.
It's never enough. You never measure up, and you fear you won't make it. You criticize yourself, and it just keeps escalating. We often say, stop putting so much pressure on yourself. You still have to achieve things. You still have to do things. But instead of pressuring yourself, support yourself. Learn to support yourself. And say, let's see if I make it. Let's see if I can. I'm going to try. If I can't, I worry about failing and people thinking I didn't make it. What am I thinking? What are others thinking about me and my vibe? It's about digging deeper into that drive. And if you remember, we said there's a mistaken idea. The mistaken idea is that being demanding makes you better. That's false. And another is that someone can be inferior.
But being demanding doesn't improve you, at least not materially.
No, because they're exhausting you and it's costing you.
Maybe on the material level, yes, but you're hurting yourself. That's not a healthy way to live.
Of course, yes, on the outside you'll make more money, do more things, and in theory...
In theory.
Of course, in theory.
People come in, work through that, and say, now I perform better and end up less tired.
All right. Yes, interesting. And do you think that the social changes we're experiencing as well? Well, you said that society is more competitive, that there's more competitiveness among us. Yes. Or, for example, that we have more things to compare ourselves to. I always say that as a kid, I could only compare myself to the 30 students in my class. But nowadays, with a cell phone, I can compare myself to the best in every field or the supposed best in every field from all over the world, right? Just with 3 swipes of my finger, of course. So that also creates more feelings of inferiority, or it brings them out or makes them more obvious.
Let's say you're feeding it. It makes it obvious, but at the same time you're feeding it. If you have a poisonous plant and you want it to die, don't water it. And when what we do is compare ourselves, we're feeding inferiority. Sorry, Maria.
If you have an underlying inferiority problem that comes from whatever reason in childhood or whatever, and you're constantly checking your phone and seeing people who are supposedly better than you in any area, what you're doing is watering the plant.
You're feeling inferior. That's not true. No one is inferior to others. Some people have certain strengths, while you may have different ones. But then if you're comparing yourself and feeling inferior, you're telling your inner self, we're inferior, we're not valuable. That just increases inferiority.
The solution is not to stop looking at things, but to observe the internal process of comparison and how to resolve it.
Or maybe moderate it, right? Because if we're watering it,
The ideal thing would be to resolve it. Resolving it would mean no longer watering it. Moderating, as you said, means checking social media. If you stop comparing yourself, you won't want to as much. It's the comparison that pushes you to check and see what this person is doing and what the other one is doing.
in that toxic circle of, it's true that's interesting. Look, we haven't mentioned that point. The worse you feel, the more you want to look, the more you want to see what others are doing, the more you want to compare yourself. The worse you feel, the more you want it, but in the end, nothing happens.
It's like you want to find something that soothes you, but what you find just makes things worse. It's like when you go on there, you hope to see the other person fail and then feel a little better yourself. But what you see is, and we already know this, that everything is very distorted. What you see is that it seems like everyone is doing well.
That's right. Very good. When it comes to the physical side, to the body, we can say that eating well, sleeping well, and physical exercise are essential. That's the foundation, of course. What 3 psychological pillars could we identify? I think we've already mentioned them, but just to recap.
I think a very important one is curiosity about oneself, about understanding.
And treating yourself well. In most of the therapies we do, we start there because people treat themselves terribly. They insult themselves, scold themselves, and reproach themselves. They think they're not worthy. They get proud when they think they've done well, then beat themselves up again when they make a mistake. So that's one of the pillars of what we were talking about. Treating yourself well.
In other words, kindness to oneself.
Yes, with compassion. But if you treat yourself badly, you're treating your unconscious badly. And you're creating a war within yourself. It's like your brain's right side criticizes the left and vice versa. Now there's a war. So, when you treat yourself badly and demand too much from yourself, you're placing demands on your inner self and therefore you're in conflict with yourself. This causes a lot of suffering and there's no compassion. There's pressure, there's fear, that comes from fear. The first part is to feel compassion for yourself and say, I'm suffering. I'm going to see how I can resolve this.
Okay. Or so curiosity, compassion, something else.
And discovering reality. Discovering internal and external reality. For example, another very curious thing. People come with a problem. So we say to them, okay, why does this person do that? I don't care. It already upsets me, but he still does it. It's wrong. Why does he do it? They don't see how understanding his motives helps solve their problem. When a coworker, partner, or child does something you dislike, understanding their reasons helps you respond better.
¿Qué lo hace? Te ayuda a reaccionar menos.
Recognizing that they may be afraid, misinterpreting things, ambitious, or something else. Even if it's something negative, understanding why they do it gives you a tool to avoid reacting and to suffer less. So discovering the reality of others and your own.
Very good. And to wrap up, for a viewer who is listening and says, wow, after listening to Maria and Jesus, everything I've done in therapy in the last few years hasn't helped me, what would you say to them? I don't think it's fair to other psychological approaches, their therapists or themselves. What would you say to them?
We tell them that if nothing they've tried has helped completely, they should be glad to realize that. It's like wanting to go to China but heading for the South Pole instead. Knowing you're heading to the South Pole is actually helpful. There you go. I've been walking in the wrong direction for 3 days. That's great. I'm going to take the right path now. First and second, everyone does what they can. It's not that they did it wrong, but in the search, everyone just stumbles around and does what they can. We encourage you not to get discouraged, but to keep trying to find your right path. The right path should always be within yourself.
Not outside. And I think another thing is to see that it's not that all paths are bad and only one is good. You analyze psychoanalysis and find some good aspects, but also recognize its limitations. Cognitive behavioral analysis, there are things that are good, but there are things that are limited. Some techniques are counterproductive, but they're not commonly used in psychotherapy. So if you realize that there is a part that has helped you, there are people who say, no, it helped me a little to understand myself. Yes, it helped me, but there are things that haven't changed. Well, maybe just a part. The part you've done is indeed useful. And if something is still missing, it's because there's something you're not doing.
Yes, I really like that. In the end, a message that can be seen between the lines in your speech is that always, always, always resolving suffering means looking inward.
Inside.
And society tells us, no, that you always have to look outside, a better job, a more attractive partner, a more expensive car, and that's what's going to resolve the suffering. And it seems to me that what it does is just add fuel to the fire, right?
If you want to enjoy a more expensive car, to really enjoy it, you have to be okay first, of course. So if you're going to buy the car to feel okay, you're going to end up frustrated.
Yeah, that's a common pattern, right? The whole, I'm going to get this, I get it, I don't feel good, so I must need something bigger. I get it, I still don't feel good, until you finally say, something's wrong.
Or until you miss something and believe that's why. I haven't gotten this, so I'm not okay, and that's where you get stuck. But of course, it's not that. It's about being okay on the inside and enjoying things.
Yes, that's great. Well, María, Jesús, we're wrapping up. This conversation has been quite different from our usual podcast discussions. And I admit that in many ways I've been and still am skeptical, but well, I come from a very different background. But I also admit that it has made me think about many things, and I believe there are many very, very useful points. At least so that people can also reflect and say, well, let's try to solve what makes us suffer, right? That's also the title of one of your books. So, well, we thank you from here, and I hope this will help a lot of people.
It has been a pleasure to be here.
It has been a pleasure.
Great. Well, guys, another episode of Better Than Yesterday. I hope it was helpful for you. See you in the next one. A big hug and keep empowering.